Welcome to another episode of Biz Money Talks with Tracey Bissett. I am very excited today. We have a very special guest. We have Robin Dodokin. Welcome to the show, Robin.
Hey, Tracey. Thanks for having me on Biz Matters Talks. This is sort of exciting, and I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. And so Robin has over 27 years of dispute resolution experience as an experienced commercial litigator, insolvency lawyer, mediator, and arbitrator. And we've known each other for 20 plus years, I'm going to say, back to my early days working at TD as a lender, and we got to know each other through that time. And so I'm really excited that Robin is here. She has so many insights that are really practical to share. And so, Robin, I'm going to turn it over to you just to share a little bit more about your background in your own words.
Okay, Tracey. Well, basically, my business is dispute resolution. And as you know, I've been a lawyer for a long time, since 1993. And since 2010, I've been mediating lots of kinds of disputes, especially business disputes, and more recently, arbitrating commercial contract disputes and business disputes. I really enjoy helping business people find a path forward out of a legal problem. And sometimes that means litigating rights to enforce rights or to protect rights. Sometimes it means going to a mediation to try and find a compromise solution to a problem. And at other times, it means that they require a decision from an arbitrator or a judge because the parties can't reach a decision. I just really admire the creativity and passion of entrepreneurs. I come from an entrepreneurial family, and where possible, I try to help people find ways to repair ongoing relationships. But I also know that sometimes that's not possible, and a third party has to make a decision. Since September, I've been writing a blog for mainly for lawyers and arbitrators it's called Arbitration in Business Cases. And I've been on the arbitral roster at Arbitration Place, which has been super exciting for me too.
Excellent. And I work with business owners all the time, doing a lot of financial coaching and financial education. And I've referred people to Robin in the past, because certainly where I see maybe there's some differences showing up between partners, whether they're family members or not. And it all comes back to the financial health of our business. If we're distracted because we're fighting all the time with our partner and we can't actually focus on our customers and make our business go and thrive the way we need it to, that's going to have a negative impact on our financial results. We may not be talking. It may be very costly, either from a fees perspective, because we're doing things very inefficiently. And there's so many untoward consequences that can happen when people are not getting along. And so we're going to have a great discussion today to talk about what we might do to set things up properly from the beginning, things that Robin sees that business owners are doing really well, missteps that they're doing. And so I know everybody's going to be able to take away a nugget that's going to be able to help them. And so whether it applies to your business right now or it applies in the future, all really key. And I'm sure some of the sage advice she's going to share with us will also help us in our relationships as well, because a lot of it's going to come down to the same core tenets and approaches in terms of understanding different perspectives. And so, Robin, some of our viewers might be thinking about starting a business with either a partner, maybe multiple partners, or a family member. If they want to have success right from the beginning and set themselves up right, what kinds of things should they be doing?
Sure. Well, my remarks are really framed upon the perspective of your show. You're a financial coach and business consultant. So I've tried to think of this from the perspective of planning for legal contingencies. So it's not really legal advice, it's just ideas for planning. Starting a new business is super exciting. It's a very busy time. There's so much to think about: the business structure, how you're going to finance the business, leasing, insurance, your technology, your website, your branding, marketing. You got to hire employees maybe. And it can be almost overwhelming. And it takes a lot of time. And often in that hurried, busy time to start a business, some things get forgotten. But if there's one piece of advice that you take away from me today, I really would like to stress the importance that at the beginning of the relationship of thinking about future contingencies and planning for them and trying to document them in some agreements. So there are things that we don't like thinking about, especially at the beginning of a new business relationship, or at the like things like, when are we going to retire, or what happens if I can't work anymore because of an illness or some other reason, or I have to move, or what happens if my business partner and I decide that we just can't work together anymore for a lot of different reasons. So I really recommend that if you're setting up a corporation and there's more than one shareholder, that you have your corporate lawyer prepare a shareholders agreement, or if it's a partnership, have a partnership agreement. And the kinds of things that are in there, they can be long or they can be short, and your lawyer will give you advice on it. But set up the business arrangement, how the profits are going to be divided, the roles and responsibilities of the parties, and also try and have in that agreement plans for future events that could happen. For example, if you want to retire, how is that going to happen? How will your interests be paid out? How will it be financed? When will those payments be made? How will you value your business interests and your partners? The other thing we don't want to think about, but we can become ill or disabled and be unable to work. So what happens then? Are you going to be bought out? Are you going to be paid a stream of dividends? What's the best thing for you and your family at that, thinking about down the road? And of course, these things could be amended later, but try to think about these things. And the other thing that, from my perspective, I think is a good thing to think about in these agreements is a dispute resolution clause in these agreements. What are you going to do if there's a shareholder dispute or a partner dispute? How are you going to value the business? Whose responsibility is it? How are you going to have someone exit? Are you going to require that certain steps be taken before you go to court? Like, are you going to require negotiations and mediation? Or are you going to try and keep the dispute out of the public realm, and have it go to arbitration, which for people who don't know is simply like hiring a private judge, and it's confidential and private. That's super important. And I have to say, in most closely held corporations, these shareholders agreements are thought about. There may be a draft that's unsigned, or maybe there isn't one. And the result is that when there is a dispute, then you're left with, enforcing your rights and remedies under the business legislation in whatever province you live in. There's other things to think about too, and I'm not an expert in this area, but something you should think about is, they used to call it key man insurance. I guess they probably call it key person insurance, which would address some of the things that I just talked about. And if the pandemic has taught us anything, we know that technology, intellectual property is incredibly, incredibly important these days. And you have a business that involves processes, secret formulas, manufacturing processes, or technology. Make sure that you protect your IP rights through patents, trademarks, and copyrights at the beginning. That will help you in the end of the business too, should you want to sell it to somebody else. So those are kind of the big picture things. Make an agreement while you're still on good terms with your partner about how you will exit if necessary.
Yeah, so important, because often I see disputes starting and they're bubbling because one person wants to take more money out, one person wants to fund growth in the business. Maybe their lives are very different, and one person needs the money, one person doesn't, and a whole bunch of things can come up. So it's so important to, before you get into those situations, plan how do you want to treat each other in a very fair way. I know certainly through lots of different insurance products, you can be able to obtain policies that will enable those buyouts, as Robin was talking about, so that if we're going to decide the valuation, we're going to trigger that buyout, we've got some policies to cover that in different situations. And certainly just treat each other as you want to be treated. And if you can get that down on paper, all the better. Now, I'm sure over the years, you've certainly seen people make some missteps when these kinds of conflicts come up. What stories can you share with us, or what lessons from the missteps that you've witnessed from business owners that you've either supported or you've been kind of in a vantage point where you were able to take a look inside of what was happening with their business and their dispute?
Okay, I've got a few sort of generic examples I'm going to share with you, but I'm going to sort of sound like a broken record that, again, a lot of these things could have been dealt with in a smoother way if they had agreements on how they were going to exit or resolve their disputes in those agreements that we talked about. But more often than not, there is no shareholders agreement with mechanisms to deal with these things. And, I just want to say that, thinking about how to have a corporate divorce is kind of like having a premarital contract for your business. And it's way better to negotiate this in the honeymoon stage than later. Okay. So I've seen families and business partners ripped apart, by disputes for many reasons. Sometimes it can be because one partner feels undervalued by the other partner or undercompensated. Sometimes it's a relatively small dispute that is ignored, that is not dealt with, and festers into a big resentment, and then something will trigger it to pop up again. Often these disputes are about values. For example, disapproval of your partner's lifestyle. Maybe there's been an affair or divorce or drug use that is not approved of. Those kind of things can lead to incompatible business partners. Sadly, untreated health and mental health issues can also lead to disputes. Ways of dealing with business expenses can irritate one partner. Like one partner might think it's okay to write off a purchase of a trip that isn't really a business trip, or a vehicle, or that isn't really a business vehicle, which will irritate the other. The bigger issues, are usually about money. Things like unfairness in dividend payments and distributions, lack of transparency about business decisions that are made. If, for instance, if the roles they each have different, if there's more than one person, someone will have a different role. If they enter into an unauthorized transaction, if they incur debt that the other partner doesn't know about, or some other agreement, lack of transparency and communication is often a cause of disputes. Money issues are usually the biggie, as I said. Changing financial circumstances that people are not addressing. We saw this a lot in the pandemic, where businesses changed and people were unable to react or adapt quickly enough. And there's also something that you mentioned at the beginning, which I agree is often a cause of the dispute. Often there'll be shareholders that do not work in the business, that do not manage the business. They simply receive dividends, especially in an older business where there's maybe more than one generation. And there are people who work in the business that want to reinvest money to grow the business. And that value disconnect about I'm going to wait to get my money later versus I want money now is always a cause for concern. I think generally you can minimize disputes with proper governance in your business. And every business really has to think about being as professional as possible. And the things that I really think are important, and I'm sure you've seen this too, Tracy, are the need to have written policies about shareholder loans, how much, when, how they're repaid, to have principled discussions about salaries, how they're reviewed, how people are compensated, who reviews people, have policies about when dividends can be paid, how they're calculated, making sure that these types of decisions are made on the advice of the company accountant, perhaps the tax advisors. So also transparency, as I said, and good communication about almost all these kinds of decisions about money are incredibly important. So you need policies, you need rules, and you need to discuss these things. You don't have to be long, but you need to have established, the rules of the game so everyone knows how to play it. Key people have to be properly remunerated. If you underpay people who are working really hard, they'll leave, or it will cause a dispute. Having disputes that you don't deal with your business partner, they affect the entire business. You will find that it affects the workplace. It becomes very toxic if it's a smaller business. You may find that key employees will just simply leave and work elsewhere. That could really happen now when there's such a need for employees. And you'll even have employees, I've even seen situations where employees have had to go on stress leave because partners have put them in the middle of a dispute that they really don't, it's very uncomfortable for them to be in the middle of that dispute. So, those things you have to think about. The other thing you have to think about, if it's a family business, but you employ outside people, you have to think about what is your policy about employing family members, whether you're going to do it or not, because quite often if that person from the family comes in, does not have the competencies or the personality to fit in, that will really irritate your employees and can cause problems. So, the thing is, when these kinds of disputes are not managed or not resolved, people start taking drastic steps. They may go to court. They may, you don't know, they might leak something to the press. Like all kinds of things can happen. And going to court over a shareholder dispute, it's always risky because one, it's public bad news about your business, so it can affect your brand. It can affect your value if there's a pending sale. And it leaves the decision about how to resolve this problem with a third party, either a judge or an arbitrator. So, sometimes that's the way it's going to go. There's just no way around it. But you want to try and minimize these disputes, and the best way to start with that is with proper governance and good communication. So I don't think I can say more about that, except, there are people who are experts in helping you professionalize your business and help you with these policies, and think about hiring them.
Yeah, when I was in high school and in university, I used to work at some family-run restaurants. And so a lot of the things you were talking about, I was often in the middle of family members wanting to do things different ways. Both places I worked were in financial distress, I would say, looking back. And so that was added to the family dramas and all kinds of different things that were happening. So really being mindful of those people who are not part of the family, if it is a family-run business, is so key. Now, you've probably seen some great examples of things going well, and you've already shared a lot of positive success tips that people can put into practice. Is there anything else you wanted to add in terms of things that people should do? Maybe we've already talked about at the beginning of the business, but you're in the business and now things are starting to not go as well. How can we kind of nip that in the bud and kind of take on that really transparent, good communication, professionalism, and really deal with things so they don't escalate and turn to a toxic environment and require somebody from a third party to come in and actually make those decisions?
I think what's clear to me anyways is that people who are willing to have difficult conversations with their business partners and able to express themselves in a factual way without any personal attack about what they perceive the problem to be, to get the other person or person's perspective on the issue and try and brainstorm to find a solution, tend to reduce the amount of disruptive disputes in their business. Sometimes people find that super uncomfortable and they might bring in a trusted advisor. And the trusted advisor could be anyone. It could be the accountant. It could be a corporate lawyer. I've heard of like a rabbi or a priest being brought in to help facilitate these discussions, and so that sometimes can lead to brainstorming about, how to deal with the situation. And sometimes, third-party neutrals are brought in. I've been brought in pre-litigation to help in business disputes, or redefining roles and figuring out what the plan is going forward. So, from my experience, as I said earlier, it's these differences in values that can lead to disputes. So the people that can try and have an open mind and who can listen to the other person's position without judgment, quietly, and think about it, and then think about their own position, and think about if there's some way of reframing it, doing things differently, trying to accommodate the other person. And you don't always have to accommodate. Sometimes it's not possible, but just really listening to each other and really talking. Those are the people those are the business leaders, I'll call them leaders, that really do well. And sometimes partners will also just realize that this particular issue at this time cannot be resolved. So we're just going to park it. We're going to keep going, and we're going to come back to it. There are situations. Oh yeah, the other thing I think that's really helpful, I didn't mention it before, is regular corporate, I'll call it retreat meetings, where you get away from the business, the day-to-day, and you talk about the challenges and opportunities facing your business, what your goals are, what changes you want to make, and sort of plan and try and really think about the next couple of years ahead of the time. There are situations that are really difficult, where there's fraud or secrecy or something. And, in those situations, there is no other way. The discussion's not going to solve that problem. And those parties are probably headed to a big dispute. Similarly, where there's been bad faith or something like that, we know where it's going. If there are, and the other thing I want to say is, from my perspective, a healthy business requires healthy owners and employees who are physically healthy and mentally healthy. And so I think it's super important that businesses have a good, I'm going to call it a wellness plan, whatever you call it, health benefits, and that there's absolutely no stigma for people asking for help for mental health issues, for addiction issues, for anything like that, because those kind of issues, if they're not dealt with, will really affect the business too, especially if we're talking about a shareholder, owner, or partner.
Excellent. And certainly you've touched on, when you're working with people, some of the results that you've seen. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with our viewers today when people bring you in advance of that kind of litigation, where you're able to help and be that independent party to help them talk through things?
Well, I mean, just have the courage to be with conflict, to have the courage to dig into it, to think about it. We tend to want to avoid it. And sometimes conflict can result in a working out of things that is better. Like we've all had that situation where we had to have a conversation, like maybe you had to fire someone and you just don't want to do it. And you drag it out for days and days and days. And then you finally have that discussion and you just feel better. So try and, I just think our society, we're so adverse to having difficult conversations, and just try and muster up the courage to do it and do it in a respectful way and see where it lands you.
Excellent. I love that. The courage to be in conflict, to have the bravery to have those difficult conversations. So before I let you go, are there any final tips you want to leave the viewers with today? Might be something you've already mentioned that you want to reiterate, or it might be something brand new.
Yeah, something I wanted to think about, it's kind of like a good thing to think about. Look, if you're an entrepreneur, you're going to work hard. And at the end of the day, you want your business to be something, either to sell or to pass on to the next generation. And succession planning is super important. And succession planning can lead to disputes. And that's why I bring this up. It can take a good 5 or 6 years, depending on the nature of your business and the complexity of it, to come up with a good plan. It's really hard to think about stepping back if you're in the driver's seat. and your accountant and corporate lawyer are good people to start with. But if you think you're going to pass on your business to the next generation, you need to start early. And there's a lot of great books out there. I'm sure you know them too, Tracy, about how to transition your kids into business when the appropriate time is, how to talk to your kids about money and their obligations and the family legacy, the values of the family you're trying to teach, and get them ready. Because, if you don't talk about it, if you don't have a plan, there may be disputes. Like, for instance, say you die and your will says that the business is going to be run by Susan, not Johnny. And Johnny doesn't see this coming. Johnny always thought he was going to be the CEO. There will be disputes. And I'm sure that's not what you intended. So think about teaching your kids how to have conversations, teaching about what the family values are. Have a good lead up to decisions. Tell them before you die, tell them before you make the decision. Have a facilitator there or a mediator at those discussions, because those can be very difficult times for people, because part of a good succession plan and a good facilitation can also be helping people think about what else they are really good at and could help the family business with. May not be the role they thought they were going to be, brought into. And HR consultants can also really help with this, with competency assessments, coaches, all kinds of things. And also for the person who's thinking about letting go and changing their life and being retired or selling the business, that's a huge step for you too. So you have to think about what's going to be meaningful for you after you finish this phase of your life, and seriously consider hiring a coach or someone to help you figure out, how you're going to replace all those hours that you worked with meaningful activities. I mean, you're going to have fun and you're going to go on trips and have fun, but you're also going to want to, you can't be an entrepreneur who's been successful at running a business and just go to full stop. You need a plan. So again, I think if you take anything away from what I'm saying today, it's plan for the future, plan for the things that you don't want to happen but might, and have some good conversations.
Love that. And I have had the privilege of working with so many, usually couples, as they're bringing a child into the business and bringing them into the fold on the financial side, really to work together. And that's been really fun because they've already made that decision that this is going to be the person who takes over, and they're really bringing up their financial acumen and helping them understand the way the business works. Lately, I've been working with a few clients as well whose dads are in the background. They're transitioning out, but the younger generation is starting to come into their own on the financial side. And so it's really, when it goes well and everybody's planned, as you say, it can be a really positive experience and be empowering for everybody involved. So before I let you go, what are you working on now, and where can people go to learn more about you and the legal and conflict resolution services that you offer?
Well, lately, it seems to me that I've been working on mediating and arbitrating business disputes, commercial contract disputes, and also shareholders disputes on the lawyer side. I have a website at dodokinlaw.com. And I have a blog, as I mentioned. You can take a look at it. Usually I have a colleague, Igor Ellen, that I write it with, and we try to find cases that are interesting about business issues and arbitration. And also you can email me, and if you have a question about what I've talked about today, and I can try and point you in the right direction.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Robin, for joining us today. I'm going to leave in the comments on all the platforms it's streaming to your contact information, link to your website, as well as link to the blog so people can have easy access and check that out. Really appreciate the tips that you shared with us, kind of from the positive side, as well as the missteps you want people to avoid. And I think what came through loud and clear is have a plan, whether it's before you're starting the business, when you're in it and you're trying to make decisions and make change, be professional, Be transparent in terms of how things are happening. And if you have respectful, open dialogue, even if you need to bring in a third party to help maintain that, be open to listening and looking at reframing things from the other person's perspective. And just love how you summed it up with the courage to be in conflict. I'm a very direct person, and so people who deal with me know that usually things are going to surface pretty quickly. But if that's not your nature, sitting with that and really getting comfortable with it so that you can get to the right outcomes for the business. So thank you so much, Robin. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you, Tracey. It was great to see you.
Thank you. And so there you have it, listeners, another episode of Biz Money Talks. Please go out and check out Robin's website, check out the articles, and I know that she is definitely a resource who has a lot to offer. So until next time, take good care and stay financially fit.